Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, Paul continues his discussion on using ancient wisdom to reimagine your own health and performance, and he gives you some action steps that you can take now to put these concepts into practice. Don't forget to stay tuned to the end of the podcast for an exciting announcement from the Chek Institute.
Hello and welcome back to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today we venture into part 2 of Ancient Wisdom for Reimagining Your Health and Performance. I hope you enjoyed part 1. If you did, please share it with anyone you know that could benefit from higher consciousness, which should be a pretty large number of people. In part 1 of Ancient Wisdom for Reimagining Your Health and Performance, we looked into the history of our evolution, the elements, the nature of how consciousness emerges, the importance of myth, the function and challenges of the mind, the mental structure stage of conscious development, and what it means to be in a state of integral consciousness. In this episode, I will encapsulate key concepts and action items we can all engage now to transcend our personal and collective limitations so that we can become holistic co-creators with Source, the universe. So let's get started. To begin with, let's talk a bit about the future. The future is a paradox. We will surely continue to use advanced technology, and we may destroy ourselves, or many of us on the planet, before we wise up. Unfortunately, which is what we've been doing. The level of disease caused by technologies that we intended to make our lives easier is unfortunately quite astronomical and very dangerous. Steiner, a long time ago, over 100 years ago, being as amazing a visionary as he was, said human beings will continue to make scientific advances with technology outside of themselves until they reach the realization that everything they have created outside themselves is within themselves. The question is, will they destroy the planet before they figure it out? Now, just as I highlighted the dangers of being trapped in the mental level of consciousness in part 1, it is also important to realize that what we commonly refer to as our mind is only accessible to us via our bodies. Your brain is a mental sending and receiving station, and your brain can't be any healthier than your blood or the rest of your body. Hopi prophecy suggests that at the present we are at a fork in the road, and if we keep destroying the planet in the name of lofty ideas such as military technology, shortcut gadgets, chemical manipulation of the soil, plants, oceans, and atmosphere, and more advanced weaponry, the Hopi drawings of our time show the path that we're on comes to a dead end. But if we reawaken to our responsibility to live close to and care for the earth and limit the manufacture and use of technology to only those forms that support holistic, sustainable living and supports the great chain of being, and we begin to use free energy technologies that don't pollute, we can survive and thrive in harmony with Mother Nature, and that is my dream. Steiner and many great spiritual teachers highlighted the absolute importance of spiritual development as a means of developing our light bodies. First, we have to develop conscious awareness of our light bodies, which are our energetic bodies. We all live inside of our soul. Our soul manifests from the 0-point field in a series of higher vibrational bodies that start with the causal, then you have the higher mental, the lower mental, the astral, the etheric, and the physical. Steiner and other great spiritual teachers taught us that through spiritual practice, we develop spiritual glands and organs, or glands and organs develop in our light bodies that are more structured, and we are able to use those organs in our light bodies to be conscious of the flow of energy and information the same way we are in our physical bodies. An example of that you've all experienced is in dreaming. In dreaming, you can be in any world or any place you can imagine, and the experience can be as real or more real than what you're experiencing here in your waking life. But through spiritual practice, we can develop skills like remote viewing, where we find that we can go anywhere in the universe, literally, by just holding the intention to be there. So consider that you can go to the sun, the moon, or Venus, or anywhere you want to go. And this is very, very well documented by researchers. And in fact, I am a remote viewer. So I know this to be true from personal experience. I use these skills quite often to help people. But we also have many forms of meditation that allow us to work in the astral realm, which I described in our previous podcast. And in that realm, we can feel, we can talk, we can hear, we can touch, we can smell, we can taste. And to the degree that we do work with spiritual practices that grow our capacity to be conscious in vibrational levels, or our light bodies, outside of our sense of self as only a physical being, then we are able to create more freedom and work with beings in other dimensions or higher octaves. And we also develop the ability to stay conscious in our light bodies so that when we die, we are able to stay conscious and participate in the events that lead to the next expression of ourselves in physical form. But one of the most beautiful things is as we grow in our spiritual practices and we learn to live from our heart and be more loving, we reach the point where we authentically become a citizen of the universe, not just the world. And in that, we experience true freedom, which is my dream for everybody. The next topic I'd like to talk about is transcending and including. All the great teachers of consciousness and how it evolves consistently highlight the importance of transcending and including. This means that as we emerge from one level of consciousness, the first being the archaic, into the next, we don't discard what was gained in the previous stage, for it's foundational. The archaic is the foundation of the magic, the foundation of the mythic, the foundation of the mental, the foundation of the integral. So as we grow from archaic to magic to mythic to mental, we develop different ways of relating and experiencing consciousness and all of the things around us, whether it be stones or plants or trees or people or ideas and concepts. And that is very, very necessary, or we can get hung up in any given stage. And I'm hoping that from the information I've shared with you so far, you can look around and even look into yourself and see the signs and symptoms of people at different stages. For example, people in fundamentalist religious ideologies are really stuck in a combination of magic and mythic, which Ken Wilber calls the traditional stage, but they're unable to fully access the potential of the mental stage, which would be in the modern stage of spiritual or consciousness development, which leads to the postmodern and finally to integral in Ken Wilber's model. If you ask a typical medical doctor for their opinions toward the use of such therapies as mud baths, water therapies, sun gazing, crystal healing, and even things like herbology and acupuncture, you may get rolling eyes, or they will tell you that such things are silly or even useless. This is exactly what it looks like when someone at the mental level, intellectual of development, has transcended without including the previous stages. This would be akin to an adult saying that they have no use for their parents anymore because they can pay their own bills and have other people to love them. Yet we all know that any loss of harmony and support, be it emotional or otherwise, from our parents can be exceedingly painful and disruptive to our psychic and physical health. Your ego may tell you that you don't need your parents, or even that you don't care for them, but your soul always knows the truth, and your body will always mirror the deeper truth. Therefore, the first practical tip of the day is to be aware of the structure stages of consciousness and what is associated with them, as I shared in part 1 of the program, and apply them where they're appropriate in your life, or you will suffer the pains of a lack of holism, a lack of being whole in your life. What I'll now do is revisit each of the structure stages of consciousness that we covered in part 1 and the key qualities associated with them, and share tips for including them and using them in your life so that you may enjoy the practice of holistic thinking and holistic living. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to address this very important question. What does it mean to be healthy? What most people think being healthy is having a body that works perfectly, good looking in the mirror, washboard abs. Unfortunately, most of what people think is healthy is based on what is going on in the fashion industry and Playboy magazine and things like that, because they're measuring themselves against whatever they think is creating success for people, whoever that might be. But that's a potentially dangerous and limited viewpoint. And there was a time in my life that I too thought that being healthy meant that you had nothing going on with your body other than just perfection. But general health comes by way of living 4 doctors: Dr. Happiness, Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Movement, and the 6 foundation principles that I and the instructors teach through the Chek Holistic Lifestyle Coaching Program, which are nutrition, hydration, sleep, breathing, thinking, and movement. But we have to look deeper. Why people get sick or acquire diseases when they're doing the very best to be healthy is a real question, because I've known many, many people who have beautiful looking bodies, eat well, exercise well, do their best to get plenty of rest, and do spend adequate time doing things that are happy making. But sometimes they get sick, sometimes they get diseases, and sometimes they die. And it's very confusing to people. So some of the things that lead to people that may look healthy but end up sick or diseased are not healing their wounds and emotional pains from past trauma, holding on to judgments that separate them from others or nature itself. That's a very, very big thing. In fact, a lot of what drives people to be fit and beautiful is a compensation for the fact that the child in them does not feel the connection, love, and support of their parents and their family, or that they may be unique and different. They may be very artistic or musical, or may have a passion for acting, and sometimes those things are outside of the consensus norm, and they get pushed down and told to do things like becoming a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse or something that's kind of fits the consensus norm, the average individual. Being trapped in a belief system that is limiting one's ability to live fully and fulfill their soul contracts is a very common way that people get diseases, and I've seen this over and over and over again. And it's important to remember that organized religion, which I call corporate religion, is a belief system. They're literally cults if you look at them from the perspective of what a cult is. And one of the key things that makes a cult is that there's always somebody controlling you, telling you what to think and how to live and what to do. So consider that when it comes to organized religion. There is beauty available, but typically you have to look deeper than the words written on paper. Another reason seemingly healthy people get sick is they're getting an apprenticeship. Their soul is guiding them into the experience of a disease to help them grow, to teach them how to love more fully, to inspire them to look into that disease, research it, and come up with solutions that have possibly never been found, so that they can then carry that wisdom into the world and help other people heal from that disease. We may also get sick because of the soul's quest to learn. The soul can take us into illness and disease to teach us to have more empathy and compassion for others and for ourselves. It can take us into disease to teach us to strengthen and deepen our connection to spirit, to soul, and to source. It can take us into disease to teach us how to deal with pain and adversity and challenge. It can take us into disease to teach us to slow down and take stock of what is really important, and to look deeper into our consciousness to see where we have limiting beliefs. The soul may give us a disease because we have a spiritual responsibility for teaching others how to love. An example I've seen a number of times is children who get cancer and other serious diseases. But when I look into this, I find that these souls have taken on that disease and knew they were going to have it coming in, because their soul contract with their family members is to teach them how to love, and in so doing how to live, and often how to die, and how to die bravely and without unnecessary fear. And it's amazing how children can do that. And finally, we may be getting a shamanic initiation. Being initiated as a shaman is not an easy path. Typically, people that become shaman have very traumatic upbringings and challenging lives. And that's a form of energy entanglement that spirit uses. And as we unlock our pains and free the energy trapped in them, we have a tremendous amount of energy that can be used to help heal others and heal the world. A fantastic interview that I recently listened to that gets into this very beautifully and deeply is Sandra Ingerman's recent interview with Tammy Simon on her Insights at the Edge podcast. So for any of you that are suffering with health challenges and feel frustrated because you're doing everything to get healthy or to be a highly conscious person, but seem to be at an impasse, I would highly recommend you listen to Sandra Ingerman's story of her own challenges in that regard. So in this podcast, part 2 of Ancient Wisdom for Reimagining Your Health and Performance, it is my aim to share holistic approaches to healing, growing, and thriving in a modern world so we can all be the change and live in ways that, if emulated by others, leads to social, cultural change and facilitates balance and harmony between human beings and between human beings and nature. So now let's take a look at ways we can apply the knowledge of each of the structure stages of consciousness that I covered in part 1 of this series as a means of living a truly holistic life. I've studied a lot of people over the last 35 plus years of my career, everyone from Hippocrates to Paramahansa Yogananda to Margaret Newman, an incredible woman and revolutionary nurse. I have great appreciation and gratitude for all these people who came before me. They inspired me, inspired my career, and helped me to reimagine what it means to be healthy. Hippocrates really affected me because his primary dictum, which strangely enough is the dictum of the medical system, is first do no harm. So I loved Hippocrates' teachings because he was a man that used about 40 herbs. He had a medicine ball made from a pig's bladder filled with sand that he used with patients, and he was very much into the basic principles of alchemy and really worked to grow his knowledge and to understand life, not just the problems of people such as this isn't working or that's working or, I'm wetting my bed or whatever it might be, but really he looked at people holistically. And he really taught us that there are effective natural means that we should always try first before we go to invasive procedures, which today might be drugs and surgery. I really loved Margaret Newman's teaching. When I found them, I was blown away by them. Margaret Newman was a holistic nurse, and she really taught me a very deep lesson about what health really is. She helped me evaluate my own ideas of health and what it means to be healthy. And she showed me that sometimes a person may not have good health, but if they're handling the challenge in ways that grow them, then they truly are a healthy person. And so I really learned to look more deeply into each individual and help them see their challenges as part of their health creation process. I've been really fortunate to be able to coach a lot of clients who reach and exceed their health goals over the years, and I hope that for many of you listening, the Chek Institute has been able to inspire you and educate you to do the same. But there's still so much more to be done. There's a lot to be discovered about human health, how we can heal the world and each other, and it's up to you, the next generation of coaches, thinkers, and innovators, to become the new leaders in holistic health and continue to reimagine what it means to be healthy and how we can reach our true human potential. So to help support all of you in becoming the next generation of leaders, over the coming weeks, I'll be releasing some short videos on influential figures in holistic health, people that have inspired me, and I bet they'll do the same for you. I will be releasing 2 special solo podcasts on the past and future of holistic health, and I think you're really going to love them. And finally, on Black Friday, I'll be holding a special 20% discount on all the original Chek products, plus even greater discounts on new courses and packages. All of the skills you'll learn in these courses served me very well over my career, and I know they'll do the same for you. At least that's my dream. Keep an eye out on Instagram and on the Chek social media channels for updates on all of these events. Now let's get back to the podcast. I love the podcast. Hope you're enjoying it. We'll begin with archaic consciousness, which as a snapshot reminder relates to stones, earth, plants, trees, guts, intuition and sensation, and being one with nature or fused into nature. So here are some tips for engaging archaic consciousness and its important components. And this is very important because many people have got so trapped in the mental, they've completely lost awareness of archaic consciousness. And if you look at the way we're handling the earth, it's dead obvious that we've lost touch with archaic consciousness. First is the air. Getting outdoors and breathing fresh air often is very, very healthy. Research shows that even in big cities like New York, the air outside a building is about 10 times cleaner on average than the air inside the building. Another key thing is breathing correctly, whether that be for general health, athletic performance, or your psychic health or mental health. It's important to remember that an optimal breath happens if you put one hand on your belly and one hand on your chest, and as you inhale, the first 2/3 of the breath should come from expansion of the belly, and only the last third of the breath should come from the chest. We should also have expansion of the lower ribs. So if you put your fingers down just above your kidneys and find your bottom rib, as you're filling your lungs with air, especially in the last third of the breath, you should feel those ribs moving laterally. They often don't because of the tightness created by low back pain, poor core control, inflammation of the kidneys, adrenal exhaustion, and a variety of other things that cause compensations and tension in the quadratus lumborum muscles and muscles in the low back region. So it's very important to keep our structure healthy, keep our posture good, keep our bodies mobile and flexible, as I show how to do in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. But remember that your breathing pattern is very important because it determines the volume of oxygen or air you're getting per breath, which has a huge influence on how your autonomic nervous system balances. I've seen countless people go to breathing workshops and Wim Hof workshops, and do all sorts of breathing exercises, but come to me with problems. And when I evaluate them, to this day, I've not seen one single person yet, no matter how many breathing workshops they've done, that actually has a normal breathing pattern. Remembering that with a normal breathing pattern, the belly expands for the first 2/3, the chest the last 1/3. But as we're breathing in, our spine should lengthen. Our rib cage should expand. And as I said, the lower rib should expand as well. If we don't have that normal function of lengthening chest expansion, belly expansion, and lateral expansion of the ribs, it typically means that we are either have an unresolved injury or we're holding psychic energy somewhere that we're not ready to deal with. And the effect is that it tightens up muscles and blocks the movement of joints and has the knock-on effect of diminishing how much oxygen we get per breath, which again affects the balance of the autonomic nervous system. Breathing rhythms is very, very important. Learning how to control the rhythm of your breathing, which is one of the key things taught in yoga, Wim Hof's practices, and related breathing practices. So you can also use breathing for connecting to your spirit and getting deeper into your consciousness and consciousness itself. So when I'm speaking of breathing rhythms, I'm speaking of the pace at which you bring air in and release the air. So some of you are familiar with piston breathing, which is very, very fast. It's a pumping, which will stimulate the sympathetic system. But if you switch to a pattern like a 4-6-8, inhale for 4 through your nose, hold your breath for 6, and slowly exhale through the mouth or nose for 8, that will trigger a parasympathetic reaction, which will aid digestion, elimination, metabolism, assimilation, growth, and repair, which is what most people need. So because I've got a lot to cover in this podcast, I'm just pointing to some general concepts. In the Chek practitioner training and Chek holistic lifestyle coach training, we give you comprehensive training on how to assess breathing patterns and restore breathing patterns and identify where people's blockages are coming from that are stopping them breathing properly, be they physical, emotional, or mental. Our next stop on our tour of archaic consciousness and how we can heal ourselves and work holistically is grounding yourself, making sure you get your shoes off and get your feet on the ground somewhere where there's not a bunch of chemicals on the ground. You've got to be very, very careful in public parks and public places and golf courses because they use a lot of Roundup and other chemicals that can go right through your feet. And that should concern all of us. The fact that we even have to be thinking about that means that we're doing something very dangerously wrong. And it's important to share our voices on the importance of keeping the ground healthy and keeping the microorganisms alive. They're the foundation of life itself. Another important thing is getting a grounding mat for your bed and your pillowcase, and they even have grounding mats you can put at your desk so you can work with your shoes off and stay grounded, which bleeds a lot of electromagnetic pollution out of your body, decreases inflammation, and helps your body and your mind function much better. We can also use clay for detoxification. If you go to the health food store, most health food stores in there, where they sell the supplements and things like that, have medicinal clay. A key type of clay is montmilliorite bentonite clay, which can be used for detoxification, and there's even books on detoxification and books on how to use clay that explain that. We can use clay for pottery and for painting pottery, which is really fun. And getting your hands in the clay has a very powerful grounding effect on you, and it gives you a chance to express your creativity. And if you're not that into pottery, you may really enjoy painting pottery. A couple years ago on New Year's, Penny, Angie, and I took Mana down, and we had some family members with us. We went to a place here in town. I can't remember the name of it, but they have pre-made pottery that you can paint, from cups and bowls to plates to teacups and saucers and a whole wide variety of things. And then they have special paint that you use to paint them, and then they fire them for you. And you for the price you pay, you get the paint and you get them fired, and then you can come pick them up, or they may ship them to you. And one of my favorite plates in the whole world is the plate that I painted while I was there, and I absolutely love it. And all of us made neat things. Next, we have diatomaceous earth, which is very helpful for detox and killing parasites. And if you just research diatomaceous earth, you'll find lots of very good information. And it's a very simple, very effective tool to aid detoxification and kill parasites. Stones are very helpful for healing, and they can also be used to balance the chakras. So we have all the various gemstones, and they have different frequencies that can be correlated to different chakras and even body systems. One of the uses of stones that I've used to help myself and help many other people heal is therapeutic stone jewelry. If you get well-designed therapeutic stones jewelry, the jeweler can use the right stones to create the right frequencies to either balance your body or open certain energy centers and chakras so that different functions of consciousness are enhanced. A lady named Vidya McNeil was my assistant for 11 years, and she's an absolute expert at making stone jewelry. And she usually has you fill out a report, and sometimes she wants a picture of you so she can read your energy field. And she will custom make necklaces, bracelets, and various forms of jewelry that is very, very beautiful, and for the amount of time and energy it takes her to do it, quite cost effective. If you're interested in that, you can reach Vidya at the following email address, vidya at Akasha, AKASHA, number 4, life.com. Vidya at akasha4life.com. Many of my clients have hired Vidya to make custom jewelry for them and for gifts for other people, and I've never heard anything but positive feedback. We can use stones for meditation. We can get stones that help bring us into a meditative state, such as amethyst. One of the things I loved using is my biomat, which is full of amethyst crystals, and it really brings me into a meditative state very quickly, particularly because it has infrared in it. There's an infrared system in it, so you couple infrared energy with crystals, and you can get opened up quite beautifully and quickly. We can use big stones, like the kinds of stones you climb out in nature or cliffs, to meditate. The alchemists call the practice of sublimation rising above. So when you're sublimating, you're getting above. So when you have challenges in your life that you're having a hard time figuring out, getting to high places where, of course, be safe, but sitting up high like in a mountain, or climbing up a water tower, or even climbing up to the roof of your house so you have a big picture view and meditating there, can be very helpful. But when we're sitting on stones to meditate, we're connecting to the earth. And remember, stones are conductors of cosmic information and cosmic energy, so they can help open us up. I love meditating on big stones. Meditation takes you down into the earth to explore its inner dimensions if you allow yourself to focus your orientation and your intention on going down into the lower realms. You can, for example, hold your intention on being inside the very core of Mother Earth and allow yourself to move in spirit body down into these inner dimensions and have experiences of the types of energy and consciousness and the beings that live within the earth. And you can have some amazing and beautiful experiences. I've had many of them, and I absolutely love them. Spend time in caves whenever you can. Caves are really cool places, and when you spend time in caves, you can see why the yogis spend so much time in there meditating. It's very stabilizing. A few years ago, my buddy Rory Mullen, for my birthday, took me to a friend of ours, Al Reed's place, and on his property, he's actually got quite a big cave, and we went in there, and we spent the evening in there chanting, dancing, meditating, and doing some plant medicine ceremony work in there. And Rory brought in a Mexican shaman who played his water drum and sang songs to us, and it was absolutely a mind-boggling experience. We can also use what are called stone elixirs. Stone elixirs are kind of like flower essences, but the makers of stone elixirs take key stones that have healing properties and they put them in water, usually in the sunlight, and the water absorbs the vibration of the stones so that when you drink it, you actually get the medicinal benefits of the energy and information carried in that specific stone. An example of a stone that I've used to make my own stone elixirs for my clients with is bloodstone, which is very, very supportive of the blood system in the human body and for healing any blood-based illness. And so you can put a bloodstone in some high-quality drinking water in a glass jar and leave it in the sun for several hours or all day, and then you can drink the water out of the jar and you will pick up the vibration and the energy of the bloodstone, which can be very healing. You can do this with all sorts of different stones. Amulets are very, very helpful. An amulet is a stone that is charged with healing intention. So if you take your favorite crystal or you go out in nature and look for a rock that calls to you, or walk the beach and look for a rock that calls to you, then you can put a blessing into it, or a prayer, or any intention that has the benefits of helping you heal or helping somebody else. And each time you do that, that stone becomes charged with more and more of your psychic energy. And some healers and people like Steiner say if you put enough energy into a stone like that, enough psychic energy, it begins to become conscious within itself. It wakes up, so to speak. And this is one of the reasons that healers use stones and use them regularly and touch them and hold them and love them and speak to them. And since crystals are actually living stones, they're not dead stones, they actually grow and have consciousness. Putting your consciousness into a crystal, for example, can be a very powerful way to facilitate your own healing and support others with their healing. We can use stones for creative expression and functional exercise. I imagine some of you have seen pictures of me on Instagram or on my YouTube channel or various places where I've shared pictures, but I do a lot of stone work. You can go out in nature or even in your backyard. You can get some stones from a landscaping supply place, or go find some, and you can make patterns on the ground, or you can practice stone stacking, which is quite athletic and artistic. You can use stones to do workouts, whether it be flipping them, rolling them on their edges, carrying them, pressing them. Sometimes I get on my hands and knees and push them. There's a lot of things you can do with stones to get just a mind-blowingly good workout. You can put stones in your garden around plants and trees in circles, which draws energy into the soil and supports the growth and development of the plants and trees. And I have all my trees circled with stones, and this is an ancient technique that farmers and gardeners have used for a long time. And if you make a rock stack and circle it with stone, you will have both the male and the female. If you're sensitive enough, you can walk around your property and find where you feel an energy deficit, like a negative energy, where your body feels weaker, more tired, or out of balance, and then create a stone stack there. And that'll act like a giant acupuncture needle, drawing energy into the earth and enlivening it. And if you circle that, the circle of stones represents the feminine and the stone stack represents the masculine. You'll set up a field of polarity or action there that could enliven the soil and really enhance the energy of the place that you're doing that. Hi, this is Paul Chek, and I am super excited to share an amazing line of super nutritional products that I found called Organifi, O-R-G-A-N-I-F-I. If you go to Organifi.com and check out their product line, they have a wide variety of excellent products. And unlike any food-based product company that's ever showed interest in sponsoring the Chek Institute or any of my courses or products or videos or any of the projects I've done, that stated they were organic. When I asked them for their organic certification, I never got them. I have been through this before. When I contacted Organifi and asked to see their documentation that they were legitimately using organic source materials, very quickly I got an email with 14 organic certifications showing that their source materials are certified organic. Then I put the products to the test with my family and on my own body, and I must say I was very impressed. They have a wide variety. They have green juice, red juice. They have a product called Gold that aids with sleep, muscle aches and pains, and joint stiffness. It helps bolster your immunity. It's awesome. One of my favorites is called Pure, and it's got lion's mane. It's Baobab infused. It's great for gut health, brain performance. Lion's mane is excellent for stimulating neurogenesis. I love to give it to my son Mana. Another one that's fantastic is Immunity, which is an organic superfood product, and it supports your immune system. It tastes fantastic. I like to put these right in some water and mix them in and drink them, or put them into tea. They have a variety of great stuff like green juices, red juice. They have Organifi Gold. It aids with restless sleep, muscle aches and pains, stiff joints, bolsters your immunity. You'll wake up feeling rejuvenated if you have that in the evening. They have awesome protein powders. Angie's about to give birth to our second child, and she's been really enjoying their protein powder. Their products are safe for pregnant mothers. I'm a very picky guy, and I'm hard to impress when it comes to food products, but these guys really got me. I love the products. If you are ready to try some amazing products that can really make your life more efficient, if you don't have time to do a lot of cooking, you're a busy executive, or you're a mother and you've got lots going on and you need something to give your kids now and then that's legitimately nutritious, good for them, and organic, which means clean and high in nutrients, you can't go wrong with Organifi. Go to Organifi, Organifi.com, and when you're checking out, put in Chek 20, lowercase c, lowercase h, lowercase e, lowercase k, 20, and you will get a 20% off at checkout, and you will be amazed, just like I was. Can't wait to hear your feedback. Check them out, Organifi.com. When you're checking out, use the code CHEK20 for a 20% discount, and prepare to be nourished, enlivened, and amazed. I'd love to hear your feedback. We can climb stones or climb rocks outdoors and be connected to stones in the earth that way, and we're accessing archaic consciousness if we just relax and let whatever rises up through our unconscious into our conscious nurture and guide us. We can also use rock art by painting rocks and doing things like carving stones and making our own jewelry. I love painting rocks, and so does my son Mana, and him and I have painted several rocks together, and it's really fun. And I've got rocks here in my office that were given to me as gifts. Ryan Hughes, the famous motocross racer who was many years coached by me, and I served as his therapist while he was a professional motocross racer and helped him through a number of injuries. And I turned him on to painting and stone painting, and I'm looking at it right now. He brought me a beautiful, beautiful stone that he painted, and a nice seashell he painted as a gift for me. And these are very therapeutic things, and whenever we're doing art, we can let go of our conscious mind and let the art spirit move through us. And when we're holding a stone and we go into that state of open emptiness, archaic consciousness rises through us, inspires us, and feeds us with the wisdom that creates the entire universe and the earth itself. Next, we have water. Water quality and guidelines for consumption are shared in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, if those of you listening aren't familiar with that. Hydration is critical, and the best solution for pollution is dilution, and water is nature's best solvent. So keeping our water levels up, our hydration up, is very, very critical to health and consciousness. You can use stones to charge your water. I do what I call a Zen in the Garden class up here once or twice a year, and occasionally I teach people how to make stone water chargers, which are absolutely amazing and powerful, and structure the water and make it much more vital and healthy for you. You can use gemstones to put in your water, as I mentioned earlier. It's important to have good filtration systems and test the pH of your water, especially if you're in a home and you want to make sure that you're getting quality water. It's important to realize you can't just go buy any filter. If you just search water testing, you can find places that'll test your water. And for example, if you have high levels of fluoride, you would need to then look for a filtration system that will remove the fluoride. But you may have a system, or just go buy a system that isn't ideally suited to removing fluoride or any number of different types of heavy metals and things and organisms that often show up in water, be it in city water or in the water that you get out of the ground if you live out somewhere where you have your own well. Testing the pH of water is very, very important, because a lot of water, especially water running through reverse osmosis filters, becomes quite acidic. So you want to make sure that your water is at least 7 pH, and if it's lower than that, just taking some high-quality Celtic sea salt or any high-quality salt and putting a little pinch of that in the water. If you do that in say a quart jug, or about the volume of water you carry around in your water bottle, you'll learn by using a pH strip and putting a little salt in, stirring it in, dissolving it, and testing the pH, and then deciding if you need a little more salt. You'll learn how much salt to put in to your typical quart or half gallon or gallon of water, so that you can bring the pH to at least 7. And for a lot of people, pH 7 to 8.5 is fine. If you go higher than 8.5, that's fine for short periods when you're doing detoxification work or things like that. But generally, somewhere between 7 and 8 is just great. It's also important to remember to use ceramic glass or stainless steel water bottles whenever you can, so that you don't get toxicity in your water from the container. Cold water therapies such as showers, baths, river dips, ocean dips, and related are very stimulating to the body, very healing to the body, can activate our anabolic hormones naturally, and can be very helpful, because when we get cold in the water, the first thing that happens is we have dilation of the surface blood vessels, and our entire arteriovascular tree opens and sends blood to the surface to try to warm us up. But as we start going numb, the entire arteriovascular tree constricts and brings the blood toward the core. So alternating hot and cold, for example, getting yourself cold, preferably to where you're just going numb, and then going to hot, actually is a form of exercise for the arteriovascular tree. And this is very, very important, because most of you will have seen people that as they age, they get a lot of pooling of fluids in the lower leg. You see on buses and trains and airplanes all sorts of women with pressure stockings on, sometimes men, but I see it more in women, and varicose veins. And oftentimes this is due to the fact that the arteriovascular tree has weakened over time, which has a lot to do with not moving enough and sitting too much, which puts pressure behind the knees where the posterior tibial artery is, and makes it hard for the blood to return back up to the heart. Next is the sun. Most of us know that the sun is a source, a very important source of vitamin D, and also ultraviolet light, which has a variety of healing benefits. It's you never really realize how important the sun is to your health, vitality, and even psychological health until you're in a place like Copenhagen or, over in that region of the world, Scandinavia, as I've spent many, many years teaching over there, moving in and out of that region, and have been there in the wintertime when the days are very long. In fact, one of the things I love about going to Sweden and Denmark, particularly Sweden, where my friends, the Bloomberg family, are the owners of Aleco Barbell, is that we go do ocean swims in the morning. And believe me, it's cold there. I've been there many times when the ocean was frozen. So we had to find a place where we could actually get through or get in under the ice, and that will certainly wake you up for the day. But when you're in places like that, it's amazing how quickly you can start feeling depressed and lethargic and dull. I remember having to go out, and I was there for quite a long trip at one point, and found myself really having a hard time just getting excited about anything, and ended up buying a seasonal affective disorder light, which helped tremendously. But the point being is the sun is very, very important to our health and vitality, and I link that to archaic consciousness because it's part of the process of creating life. It's part of how nature emerges, and without the sun we would have no life on earth, and therefore we would have never been able to move through the structure stages of consciousness. One of the things my soul led me to do in the year that I was a vegetarian is sun gazing. To do sun gazing, you get up with the sun as it's rising. You can look at the sun for the first and last hour of sunlight each day. And this is an ancient Egyptian practice, and for many it's their only spiritual practice, aside from capitalizing on the wisdom gained from connecting to the sun. But you can actually have beautiful and deep meditative and profound experiences of connecting with the consciousness of the sun. And I won't go into all that in any great depth right now because I have too much to share, but I've had profound experiences engaging the consciousness of the sun, and had many amazing visions and out-of-body experiences and astral travel, and have remote viewed to go to the sun and see what's there many times. But the sun is a beautiful, important part of living a holistic, healthy life. Next, we have the stars. It's important to remember that we are all star people. And, scientific investigations into the elements on this planet has shown that the elements, not only did they come from our sun, but when they look into the elements on the planet, they find that they are from the stars, but interestingly, the elements in stars came from a myriad of other stars. So what's in our sun was once in other stars. And that's been going on for, potentially forever. Depends what belief system you're in. If you want to stick with this current scientific model, about 13.8 billion years since the Big Bang. But if you study Itzhak Bentov and others like him, he reminds us we should get rid of the idea of the Big Bang and call it the continuous bang, because it was just one in an infinite series of Big Bangs. But the stars are very, very beautiful and can open us up to many amazing experiences and insights. But particularly, it's good to remember that we are star people. What we are is congruent with and inseparable from the stars at many levels. If we study astronomy, which is the objective study of the stars, and astrology, which is the subjective of the star explanation of the stars and the energies and the consciousness of them, we can learn a tremendous amount about ourselves. Now, there's a lot of, cheesy astrology out there, such as newspaper astrology, but I can assure you, from having investigated it quite extensively myself and worked with Western astrologers and Vedic astrologers, that some of the insights from astrology are very profound. We can watch the night sky and wonder and dream. The Aboriginal people say that the stars are the campfires of our ancestors. So if you just meditate on that, it's very beautiful and very deep. And that, if you just hold the thought, the stars are the campfires of our ancestors, while laying on your back under the stars and just going into meditation, which is called a contemplative meditation, and open your eyes to the light of the stars, let it enter you, and empty yourself of any thought, and you can have some very amazing experiences. I've had profound experiences of what I call the star beings, and I've even drawn and painted some of them because they were so mind-blowing. Try emptying yourself of your education and communicate with one of the stars or a formation of them, and as I said, see what happens. And it's always wise to remember what Mark Twain wisely said: don't let your schooling get in the way of your education. I've met many people that were so smart that they were not so smart, and their life and their body reflected that. So though some of these things I'm sharing here may sound far out or hippie-like to some of you, as I tell my students, don't believe a word I say. Go out and try it for yourself, and then let's talk about it. Next, we have being in forested areas or around trees. Oxygen is abundant around trees, fresh oxygen. Trees produce oxygen. So we can get higher saturation of oxygen in our bodies by being near the trees, which has many beneficial effects. Trees, like plants, are conscious beings, and you can learn a lot from being with and meditating with them and observing how much life depends on trees and how much life there is in trees. It's also important to remember that trees are massive antenna systems. The Native American Indians used to do tree meditations, and I've done many of them and had profound tree meditation experiences. I've meditated by standing and leaning against trees all over the world. So we can tap into higher dimensions or even lower dimensions by using our consciousness to connect with that of the tree and asking for assistance, or just emptying ourselves and opening ourselves to the consciousness, and the energy and information flows moving through the tree, and it's very beautiful and profound. Trees are also, as you know, a source of food, be it nuts or fruit, and we should let our bodies guide us to when these sources are ideal for us, and to be aware of when we start getting symptoms to back off of whatever it is that we once found nourishing. So, for example, if you like almonds, or you're being called to almonds, be very aware of when eating those almonds is no longer making you feel better, but is somehow creating some kind of a negative symptom. And then if you practice what I teach in my Primal Pattern Eating online training program via the Chek Institute, you can learn to connect through muscle testing to your body and soul connection to your soul, and be guided as to when to add or subtract different foods so that you can stay healthy. And there's a technique I call tree Tai Chi, which is a free form of Tai Chi. And basically what I do, and my soul guided me to this, is I go out next to a tree and I just bring my consciousness to the trunk of the tree. And then as I slowly bring my vision and my gaze up the tree, I might follow one branch with my right arm and another branch with my left arm, and I will begin to just let my body move as though I was actually the tree itself growing. And then you can just sort of follow the branches and flow. And what happens if you start by connecting to the tree, but focusing your awareness on the tree, and saying, "Dear tree, if you can hear me, please increase the energy in my body," and then you relax, you'll feel the tree will talk back to you. And if you say, "Dear tree, would you guide me through a meditation so I can experience treeness?" then relax. All of a sudden, you'll begin to feel as though there was an invisible instructor moving your body very gently, and your body will be going through waving motions like the wind blowing on a tree, or your arms will be going out or up, and you may even have the feeling that the sunshine hitting your skin is like the sunshine hitting the leaves on a tree, and it can be extremely beautiful, fun, and it's a great way to get out of your head and be creative. Next, we have plants. Developing relationships with them is a very, very safe way to gain love and learn to love in relationships that are unlikely to be painful. Many of us have been hurt in relationships with other human beings where we wanted love and wanted to share love, but ended up in pain. And sometimes we forget how to love. So people that have that kind of profile, I often encourage to go buy some plants or some small trees that they can put in their house and really nurture and love them and talk to them and pet them and use your intuition to find out what kinds of music they like. And you can really tap into archaic consciousness. And remember, archaic consciousness is the consciousness that produces the plants and brings all the ideas, all the archetypes of the plants, the trees, and the animals into the earth so that the energy flows and information of those archetypes can be embodied here on the planet. And Rudolf Steiner talks quite about that, but it's too deep for me to really expand on here. But if you're interested, you can look into Rudolf Steiner's teaching, or you can look into the books by Dennis Klocek, Klocek. They're quite deep, just to warn you. So if you're looking for light reading, he's not the guy. Neither is Steiner, but if you want to learn, you got to get deep. So talking to them is also very, very important because you can really learn a lot from plants. I've learned tons from plants and trees. In fact, right next to me here, I have I call her Mama plant. She's been with me for probably 15 years, and there's been a number of cases of people that had real serious emotional blockages in them and a lot of pain. And I introduced them to Mama Plant and asked her to do a healing on them. And every single one of them, even left brain dominant people, have been shocked that they can feel her working inside of them. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's also important to remember that shaman created a huge amount of the medicines sold by the drug industry today. And the drug companies sent researchers out into the jungle to speak to the shaman, learn the recipes, and then they stole the recipes, changed the names, and synthesized the drugs and sell them to you, and never did anything to support the shamanic or native communities where they got the information from. But the key point is that the shaman will always tell you, when you ask them, how did you learn to make medicines like ayahuasca or this poultice or that healing medicine, they will tell you, the plants taught us. And if you want a real good example of that, get the beautiful book, Thus Spake the Plant by Monica Gagliano, and get ready to hear a highly credentialed researcher explain her research on plants and how her work with shaman and being on different dietas or plant diets brought her into deep contact with the plants and the wisdom and the spirits within them. We can also use flower essences, which are made by taking the flowers of key plants with medicinal qualities, putting them in a bowl of high-quality water in the sun, which infuses the energy and information of the flower into the water, and then it becomes a flower essence. Bach flower remedies are very popular out there, so I like to use bush flower remedy, Australian bush flower remedies. But there's a number of companies that make beautiful flower essences that can be used to help us heal emotional blockages, anxiety, fear, depression, to create mental clarity, for calming, for meditation, for enhanced cognitive function, and many other things. Essential oils are the oils of plants and trees and can be extremely powerful. And I have two beautiful podcasts with someone who I love and appreciate deeply, Dr. Nick Berry, the Essential Oil Wizard. So if you want to learn about essential oils and how powerful they are and how to use that form of archaic consciousness to live more holistically, just go to my Living 4D podcast and look up the name Nick Berry or Dr. Nick Berry, and you will find some amazing podcasts. Also, it's important to learn to eat for your individual needs. I teach people to look at the rainbow of colors, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And in my HL, Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 2 program, in that in their manual, I give them a sheet full of key things to look at, but it has the colors of the rainbow. So a simple technique you can do is, even if you just take colored paper and get all the colors of the rainbow and put it on a table in front of you, is just relax yourself and then touch the color red and see if it makes your body feel more stable and lighter and sort of more balanced, or if it has the opposite effect on you. And you can do that with each of the colors. And if all of a sudden, for example, you touch green, well, that's an indication that you need to eat more green foods. And thus we have greens. Eat your greens. And for a lot of people that are on things like carnivore diets or keto diets, I find that they're very deficient in the nutrition from the green plants and often can't balance themselves out until they get out of this idea of, keto being great for everything, which is another fad. But the point being is, if you pay attention to how you feel when you touch each of the colors, and then look for foods that are that color and eat them, you will notice most often that you feel an improvement in your overall level of health, well-being, and inner balance, and that things that haven't been healing up can start healing up. It's also very important to remember to eat locally grown, biodynamic, or organic food whenever possible, because every dollar you spend on commercial food is not only destructive to the planet, but it's contributing to the abuse of plant and animal life and being disrespectful to life itself. So if you want to learn more about those kinds of issues, I highly recommend my podcast series I did with Matthew Walden titled The Honest Vegetarian. And we did the first podcast for the podcast, and the remaining 4 parts will be available on our new Chekiva.com website as of January the 1st. That's CHEKIVA.com, which will have all sorts of amazing things for you there. Next is the science of herbology. Many people running to medical doctors and being given drugs would be way better off to go see a good herbologist and use Mother Nature's medicine, which is an expression of archaic consciousness. Now, remember, the level of archaic consciousness connects to our gut tube, which links to, remember, the worm and the snake, and the movement of the snake being Kundalini-type energy. So whenever we have problems with peristalsis, digestion and elimination, the inchworm exercise is absolutely excellent for helping tap us back into archaic consciousness and restore the natural serpentine rhythms to our spinal column, which is important for movement, for breathing, and for all aspects of life. So any of the exercises that enhance serpentine movement, such as dancing or learning to dance, those things are super, super helpful, and I highly recommend it. Just putting on some dance music and just moving your spine in a serpentine movement is very, very helpful. In fact, if you want to experience dance in a beautiful, simple form, I mean, a lot of people out there don't dance because they're afraid of how they look or whatever their excuses are. But one of my favorite dance teachers and one of my favorite people in the whole world is a lady named Misty Tripoli. If you look up Misty Tripoli, she's a world-famous dance teacher, and I love her approach because it's really simple and it's fun to do with kids, and it's just a great way to inspire you to dance and move and let your body gyrate and pulsate and get those natural rhythms back that are inherently given through archaic consciousness. Another beautiful form of healing and expressing ourselves through the archaic level of consciousness, which also links into the magic and the mythic, is mimicking animals and exercise, using animal movements as exercise and play. Some of the exercises I teach in Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 3 are the bear, the tiger, the eagle, the dragon, which is not necessarily an animal, but it certainly works to help us engage movement and creativity. And so when we have these different types of exercises, so mimicking the bear is very close to the earth. It's a very powerful animal, and it's a master survivor and has its own system of medicine. So when we mimic the bear and we relax ourselves, we can tap into bear consciousness, or we can tap into tiger consciousness. The eagle, for example, is linked to the air element in thinking. So if we want to enhance our thinking and enhance our cognitive clarity, we can emulate the eagle, and we can fly around and pretend we're an eagle and perch and dive and open our vision and imagine that we have the vision of an eagle. And by playing and acting the eagle, you'd be amazed at the kinds of shifts you can have. And I've had many instances all over the world where I was teaching these exercises to my students, and kids came from all over, whether it be the park or the hotel or wherever, and wanted to join us. And we've had many occasions where children and their mothers joined us, and they all absolutely loved it. So be creative. Watch your pets and look at videos of animals in the wild and see what you can do. Next, let's get into magic consciousness and all the amazing ways we can live more holistically by engaging the magic level of conscious development. Now we enter magic consciousness. Again, your snapshot overview. Magic consciousness relates to the ears, or our hearing function, animals and the reptilian brain, plus our limbic feeling functions from the limbic aspects of our brain, consciousness as sacred deep listening, and fire use and worship was the encapsulation of magic consciousness. So how can we apply this holistically in our lives now, especially in a mentally dominated world? When outside, particularly in nature, listen deeply. Listen with your whole being. I'm talking about listening to the sounds of the wind, the sounds of your feet touching the earth, even the sound of your own heartbeat when you're sitting still in meditation, listening to water flowing. I've had profound, amazing experiences laying next to creeks and just emptying my mind and listening to the water. And soon I could hear the voices, the messages of all the little beings in the water, like an amazingly integrated community of living beings. And it enlivens the water inside of us, and we can go into dialogue at the beautiful, archaic, and magic levels of our consciousness and realize our oneness with nature. Listen to the sounds of the birds, the sounds of the animals. Anything you can hear out there, if you listen deeply, you'll feel it moving inside of you and informing you in some special way, which is the way we had to listen to survive in nature during the period that the magic consciousness evolved within us. Another technique that I learned from Dr. Oliver while we were teaching HLC courses together is a technique of going for a walk and listening for a minute or two, focusing on your left ear, and then switching to focusing on your right ear in a meditative state, which turns out to have a beautiful harmonizing effect on the brain, which for a lot of people today is very important because numerous things in our environment, from technologies to electromagnetic pollution to sitting too much to exercise machines that don't let us cross the midline, such as knee extensions, hamstring curls, leg presses, Smith machines, etc., all have the function of disintegrating the hemispheres of the brain. Sleep or take naps outside in nature whenever you can, and allow yourself to dream with one eye open and drop into magic consciousness so you can experience your connection to the rest of nature. A great technique I learned from Rudolf Steiner's teaching for going into meditation is to lay down somewhere, a hammock or a swing or a cot, or even on your couch in your house if you want to, and put a plate or a cookie sheet on the ground just under where your hand would be if you let your arm stretch out, and hold a piece of silverware, a fork or a knife or a spoon in your hand, and then allow yourself to fall as close to being asleep as you can, but while remaining in a state of conscious awareness. And when you enter that state, your conscious mind that's normally very outward oriented drops down into the place where the unconscious rises to the conscious and meets our default mode network where the filtration systems are. So you can drop below the filtration systems of the ego structure, the default mode network, and you can have very much the same kinds of experiences that occur with the use of psychedelic medicines. If you fall asleep, the silverware will fall out of your hand and hit the plate or the cookie tray and wake you up so you can come back to consciousness and do it again. I call that sleeping with one eye open. Practice looking at and feeling what people are saying through body language and gesture, not just their words. There's a lot more being said with facial expressions and gestures than there usually is with words. In fact, research shows 55% of language is nonverbal. It comes to us by way of body language and gesture. Listen more to what is being really said than the words being used. Quite often, people don't communicate effectively. But if you spend time with dogs or cats, they're not they're not creatures that tell lies or play silly games. They're much more honest. So if they look sad, they are sad. If they look excited, they are excited. But people do funny things like pretend they're happy when they're depressed, or pretend they're depressed when there's no need to be depressed and they just want attention and things like that. So by using magic consciousness, it brings us into this sense of deep connection with other people, just like it does with animals or other beings, be they plants or otherwise. And it's very powerful if you learn to drop into that sleeping with one eye open state. So you're not only present with what's being shared, but you're present with something even deeper. And that's the energy flowing from them into your field. Listen for people's wants, feelings, and needs, which are always there but often hidden by their judgments. Don't just listen with your ears, listen with your whole body and feel what is happening inside you as they communicate in your bones, in your organs. Listen with your heart. And when you sense incongruence, to the degree that it's important to you to get the truth, you can always ask leading questions to get more clarity. The magic is staying connected. Feel what's happening inside you when you're listening to nature sounds such as wind, water, lightning, thunder, animals, birds, snow falling, or snow moving, etc. There's a great meditation opportunity there for anybody. Get clear on your 4 doctor values, because those are ultimately what guides your feelings. Values are related to the feeling function of consciousness. And our feelings are one of the primary means by which emotions are generated. If our values are being supported, or we're living according to our values, we generally have a feeling of connection and flow and happiness. But when our values are being trespassed by ourselves or others, such as we know we're eating garbage when we shouldn't be, or staying up late and it's going to cost us, or over or under exercising, but we're doing it anyhow, then we're going to have an emotional reaction. And if that becomes a habit, then you can become quite an unpleasant person to be around and start projecting those emotions onto others. And that leads to making excuses for why you're behaving irrationally, but doesn't really do much for your relationship with yourself or the other, and it kills the magic. Pay close attention to how your emotions change when you are doing the different things we've discussed so far, as well as when you eat or drink different things, so you can see and feel how much of the spirit of what you consume is affecting you for better or worse. We must remember that when we eat or drink things, we are bringing molecules of that substance into our body, and each of those molecules potentially, depending on what you're eating or drinking, has DNA in it, which is a cosmic antenna that's linked to the spirit of that plant or animal. This is why they call alcohol spirits. So if you're eating or drinking things that bring energy and information into your being, your inner domain, that are not congruent with the needs of your body, then you will feel dissonance. You will feel off, some kind of stress, and again, you will lose the magic. Now, the reptilian brain system I've linked to the magic level of consciousness, not for any academic reasons, but because it's very, very involved in our capacity to survive. And remember, during that stage of our development, we were deeply in the wild, and we didn't have any fancy advanced technologies to support us, so we had to really pay attention to the wisdom within our reptilian brain system. This system is deep within our autonomic nervous system, and it's therefore rooted in our psyche. It relates to meeting our authentic survival needs, which requires that we are aware of our 4 doctor values at minimum, or we'll never feel safe and satiated at any level of our being. So the reptilian system is oriented towards what creates a sense of safety and security for you, but that needs to be carefully evaluated, because a lot of people's ideas about what creates safety and security are really products of their programming. For example, most of the marketing on television is designed to create the illusion that you're not safe or secure, be it security alarms for your house or giving you statistics on how many people have this or that disease, or things like that, that ultimately end up resulting in people running to have medical scans and screens and vaccinations because they think all sorts of people are dying from the flu, when most of these are contrived statistics. So it's very important for each of us to get deep enough into ourselves to really, truly realize what safety and security is. And real safety and security is having access to food, water, shelter, warmth, the ability to breathe, having people that we can share love with, and remembering that we need to share love with ourselves first and foremost, and our creativity. If we lose our creativity, we can't be safe, because you can't use the same kind of thinking that created a problem to solve it, as Einstein so beautifully informed us. Sustenance means eating what you actually need to keep your body healthy, and being careful not to believe everything you read in magazines, even in research articles, or see on television, because ultimately your body will always tell you the truth where your mind may have gotten tricked. And finally, the reptilian system is oriented toward procreation. Now, at the basic biological level, procreation means reproduction of bodies, but I'm not just talking about sex and babies. I'm talking about moving that energy into creative self-expression. So oftentimes we may have the urge to bring children into the world, but it may not be the right time in our personal development or our evolution as a human being. We may be too immature. we may not have the financial stability to support a child. So we can move that sex or procreative energy into acts of creation, be they expression through art, dance, music, singing, or athletics, or helping other people. But these are all really important elements of the magic and staying connected. Then we have the limbic emotional system. This part of our brains is highly linked to family, tribal, social, and cultural relationships. And cultivating meaningful relationships and being conscious as to how many we can effectively participate in before we start losing ourselves is very important. So when it comes to cultivating meaningful relationships, quality is much more important than quantity. We need to be careful about how much time we spend on social media, as these are much more mental relationships than they are true limbic emotional relationships that nourish us. And the statistics on social media participation and their connection to anxiety and depression are very clear indicators of that. Real contact with people is as important as real food. You might want to listen to my podcast with Nir Ayal on technology, whether or not that's enslaving us or setting us free. Consider finding a skilled shaman or going to places like Rhythmia or Solterra in Costa Rica so you can safely enter into magical consciousness and experience deep oceanic consciousness, deep connection to all that is, and to the world and beyond. Plant medicines help bring the unconscious into consciousness so subject becomes objective, and we can work with our programming and free ourselves, but it requires professional help for most people. And there is a real danger of getting too deep with plant medicines, and it can lead to, basically to schizophrenic crack up and, being confused about what's real, and many other types of trauma that I've actually seen many, many times and had to help rehabilitate people who hung out with the wrong people who had a bunch of drugs in their pocket and pretended to be shaman or experts and ended up overdosing people or giving them way too much. And though I don't have time to go into this, I have talked about this on a number of podcasts, and may do a podcast specifically on the issues of plant medicines at some time in the near future. Now we get to mythic consciousness. Our snapshot is mouth. So the mythic consciousness is related to mouth and speaking or oral communication. It's related to man and nature and sun worship and related practices. Our myth is our personal story, and it's heavily linked to our religious programming as well as our national and cultural myth. It is our story that inspires us to keep seeking knowledge, to know things, to grow, and to participate in life. If our inner story has no meaning, we are very likely to become sick people and fall headlong into any number of isms. We gravitate towards others that have a story that meets one of or more of the four functions of a myth that we are lacking, but need to have for comfort and guidance when facing the massive mystery of ourselves and life. And if you haven't listened to part 1, I outlined the 4 functions of a myth that Joseph Campbell so gratefully shared with the world. I would recommend you look into them. One of the most damaging things to our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health is incongruence between the story we tell ourselves and the story we tell others. Ken Wilber refers to this as the story gap. Examples of a story gap are telling someone that you like or love them when you don't, telling others that you have more knowledge or skill than you do have, telling others you will do things such as meeting them or doing things with them when you really have no intention of following through. This tactic is used quite often when an individual feels more comfortable with the internal stress of telling lies than they do with the potential stress of telling the truth, but it's not healthy. Pretending to be more abundant, wealthy, or successful than you are. Acting sexually provocative in ways towards another when you're in a committed relationship and know that your sexual energy and attraction should be directed toward the person you have made commitments with, unless, of course, your commitments are inclusive of the freedom to play and explore sexually. There are a few people I know that live that way, and you might want to listen to my podcast with Kyle Kingsbury and Aubrey Marcus on multiple partner relationships, so you know that there is a place where fantasy needs to meet reality. Saying anything that can mislead another when you know that you're not telling the truth. Saying things about others that are not factual or true in order to sabotage them. Maintaining superficial commitments to a religious affiliation or group that are not aligned with your actual beliefs, so that you avoid the adult responsibility of taking care of yourself or finding people that you're aligned with or who share your true values. These are just a few examples of story gaps that lead to illness, disease, and ultimately premature death. Whenever we create an illusion that is not supported by the universal harmony of the universe, or the harmony of the universe, as Arnold Patton tells us in his Universal Principles, we must provide the energy to maintain the distortion ourselves. And for many, that's just enough of an energy depletion to lower their vitality to the point that they become susceptible to chronic illness and health challenges, or susceptible to acute accidents such as crashing cars or hurting themselves with power tools, because they don't have enough energy at a certain tipping point to be fully conscious of what they're doing. It's kind of like when you're really tired and you get out of bed to walk to the bathroom and you find that your balance is very poor. It's because your energy is too inward, so the musculoskeletal system and the brain can't orient itself effectively. So when people get real tired from maintaining the illusions of story gaps, then driving cars and using knives and handling power tools and flying airplanes and things like that become very dangerous to yourself and any other around you. Next is finding or creating yourself. One of the most powerful exercises I do with my clients as part of their healing and conscious growth process is to work with them to write their own myth. You can be anyone you want to in the story, and I suggest that you write the story at the level that any 10 to 12-year-old child could read and follow it. Be creative, but be honest about the values your myth exemplifies. In other words, be as wild and crazy in the characters, the cast, etc., but make sure that the underlying story is congruent with the values that you choose to live. Your myth should address the 4 functions of a myth as outlined by Joseph Campbell that I shared in part 1 of the podcast, or your myth will not actually give you the key components that a myth is designed to give or needs to give for us to feel safe in a very mysterious universe. Remember, a myth is something that never happened, but is happening all the time. I know that's pretty deep. If you haven't listened to my podcast with Professor James Hollis, a Jungian analyst, a psychologist, and professor of Jungian psychology, highly recommend that you do that. We get into issues of myth and other very important distinctions, and it's a fantastic podcast. I got tons of great feedback. Before writing your story, your myth, look carefully into your life and the story you tell yourself inside for things that never happened, but are happening all the time. Because I know that's quite deep, I will support you with some examples. God, how's that for something that never happened, but is happening all the time? The universe, or Maya, the grand illusion. The future. It hasn't happened yet, but think of how much time people spend doing things for the future. Therefore, it's happening all the time. And since every now has no duration, the now is becoming the future at the speed of now. Fantasies are things that never happened, but they're happening all the time. You can fantasize having sex with anybody you want to, or even make creatures and beings and stories up in your head, and they never really happen, but they're happening all the time. Your death has not happened, but you're dying a little bit each day. Achieving your full potential as a human being. Well, it's a long road to achieve your full potential. So paradoxically, you never have achieved your full potential, yet each day that you're learning and growing, it's happening all the time. Losing your connection to Source or Great Spirit or God. What do I mean there? Well, you can consciously lose your connection to Source, Spirit, or God, but the truth is you are never disconnected. It's just a belief system that's getting in the way of the truth. So there's examples of how the elements of myth never happen but are happening all the time, and that's what makes myth quite magical and powerful. Now let's look at the mental level of consciousness and see what tips we can take away from our discussion that we led into in part 1. Your snapshot encapsulation is that the mental level of consciousness relates to the eyes, to thinking, to imaging and pictures, ideas, concepts, the logos, and reductionism. The mental level of consciousness can either free you and connect you or bind and debilitate you. And I have an exclamation for you there. Some tips to enhance your ability to use the mental functions of consciousness to remain holistic as we move forward into the future are as follows. The basis of what we describe with our thoughts and language is images. So what we're describing to others when we're talking, I rode my horse, or I washed my car, or I just had a great time making love to my partner. All these things that we use language for are describing the images that we have in our minds. Some would say our brain, but our brain's just a sending and receiving station for our mind. Images can be supportive or destructive of our well-being, and anybody that has studied child psychology knows how important it is to not expose children to things like movies or television shows that carry imagery that is destructive or damaging or too scary, because it can lead to all sorts of mental, emotional, and physical health problems. The mental stage of development linked by Gebser to the coming of the ego and ego perspectives can lead us to feeling isolated without realizing the ego's function is to allow us the conscious experience of love. Remember, the ego gives us our sense of I-ness. And if we did not have a sense of I, then we would not be able to have an awareness of who we were making the object of our devotion. So if there was no I, then we would not have a subject-object relationship, and there would be no way for energy, information, and empathy to function. When we feel alone and isolated, we can spend time focusing on loving ourselves, which is an essential aspect of healthy individuation, which means becoming whole within yourself, and was the main thrust behind Carl Jung's teachings. I find that one of the best ways to feel love is to start by giving gratitude for what we do have, be that breath, warmth, safety, shelter, food, and water, or our creativity. The mind can easily trick us into feeling much more isolated than we really are, because by nature, the mind is a cutting device. The ancient alchemists referred to the mind, or mind at large, as the logos cutter because of its cutting functions. To help understand that better, just realize that to comprehend anything, you must cut it out of the whole. For example, if our senses and mind didn't differentiate the colors we see, we'd only see black or white, which contain all of the colors within themselves, but in an undifferentiated form. If you put white or standard light through a prism, then you get a rainbow, so you see a differentiation of colors. When we realize the mind's cutting function, which is symbolized by the sword in tarot, if you've ever seen tarot cards, we can use it to focus, we can use it to reduce things into parts, or we can choose a holistic approach and look at how the pieces fit together to create a larger whole. We can go a step further and see that what is emergent as the pieces together may be something unique. For example, our minds have allowed us to determine that water is made of 1 part hydrogen and 2 parts oxygen, out of which we gain the emergent property of wetness. So there's an emergent property. We can use our minds to take a watch to pieces, but soon we realize that when it's in pieces, we can't use it to tell time. If we put the pieces back together in the right order in the correct way, we soon realize that the emergent property is that it allows us to be aware of seconds, minutes, hours, days, or the date, depending on the features of that particular watch. When our ego mind tends to isolation of parts or self relative to other, we can be holistic and drop back into the archaic and mythic levels of consciousness where there is no separation. Everything is an emerging whole. We can go to the magic level of ourselves and see how the magic of life supports us and how it supports life. For example, we can see the Ouroboros, the ancient image of the snake eating its tail, and we can see how that it has to survive in the living dynamics of a circle or the sphere of life. If the snake eats more than it can regenerate, it dies. If it doesn't eat enough, it can get so big that it just is, shall we say, unable to adapt to the environment, or it becomes potentially cumbersome. Just imagine a car. If it gets too big, it doesn't function. A human being, if you were 8 feet tall, you'd have a really hard time fitting into cars, getting on and off of toilets, etc. So there is a size relationship or a ratio to how things fit in nature. And when we look at the magic level of consciousness, we can see how everything in life is growing, but it's also potentially food for something else. And without death, there can be no life. Now, with regard to the mental level of consciousness, we should look here now at ideas and concepts. Ideas and concepts can either enhance our life or disable it, depending on how we use them and how we think about them or don't. Sometimes not thinking about things that we should be thinking about becomes extremely dangerous, and there's a myriad of examples I could give you of that. The key thing I've learned about ideas is that if we don't have a clear set of values to guide the use of our mind, we are susceptible to believing about anything. All you have to do is look out at all the crazy ideas about diet and the ideas and concepts that people get sucked into and how far they'll go to defend them, even when it's obvious to onlookers that it isn't working. And those of you that listen to my podcast titled The Honest Vegetarian with Matthew Walden will get plenty of examples of that. When I stack rocks and create rock sculptures, I have to pay attention to both sides of a rock, the one on the bottom and the one on the top. If I don't, what looks like a great idea or rock may stack well on the rock below that I'm stacking it on, but I soon come to the realization that I can't stack anything on top of it. And ideas are very much like that. Sometimes we get so excited about an idea because we think it fits, or it might fit our bias or our fear. Like borrowing money it might be the idea. If I just borrow money and do this quick deal, I'll be okay. But we may not look at interest rates, or we may not look at job security, or whether or not that's an efficient or an effective way to do it, or whether we're just copping out because we're not willing to do the necessary work to create long-term stability for ourselves. So a lot of things like that happen. People don't look at both sides of an idea. To apply holistic thinking to ideas and concepts, we can ask ourselves, how will applying this idea or concept affect what I'm doing now, and how will it work moving forward? How will it interface with the other aspects of my project or my life and my relationships at large? For example, I've known many people to think that joining the military was a good idea, a quick way to get a stable income and some job training, but they didn't look at the other side of the stone, so to speak, and soon found their family relationships dissolving because they got deployed overseas or ended up going on long tours on ships or submarines, and the consequences often divorce and broken children. Similarly, I've worked with a number of post-war vets with PTSD that told me they joined the military for a stable income and to get some job training, but never actually thought that they'd end up in a battlefield killing people and getting shot at or beaten and even tortured, but they did. And that is a fact. So, what am I saying? Always look at both sides of the stone, or the idea or concept. If you're not sure what you're looking at, it's wise to find someone with more experience, more wisdom with the issues at hand in your life, or you can find yourself learning all about the mind under the guidance of the pain teacher. And I do have a series of podcasts that I've put together and recorded already on the pain teacher. So if you haven't heard part 1, that will be out anytime if it's not out right now. And the remaining 4 parts will be on our new Chekiva website, www.chekiva.com, which will be open to the public as of January 1, I believe. God is probably the most dangerous idea there is. Many of you have heard me talk about God before. It's something that, unfortunately, a lot of people feel I do too much of. But when you're a therapist like I am, and you've spent 35 years looking into what's actually causing people's problems, you find out that behind every action that led to a problem, or a series of actions, or addiction, there's a belief. And when you track beliefs back to where they came from, more of them lead to religion and ideas about God than anything else. And I can tell you, I've done this type of tracking thousands of times and continue to do it right to this day in my work with clients. So, heed my words about God in part 1 of this series, and remember that, as Lao Tzu says, the Tao cannot be spoken. You cannot define God with ideas. You can only talk about God. And the word about means around. It does not mean through, in, or inclusive. And most religions are just collections of ideas about what God is or isn't. And atheism is just a rejection of ideas about God. But unfortunately, as Carl Jung says, something must be real to be rejected. So they kind of don't get the point. But I do understand the atheist rejection of, silly ideas about God, like an old man that's keeping track of how many times you masturbated, or, anything like that. At large, religions are collections of other people's idea about God. Additionally, with a little effort, you can find massive amounts of information showing how religions are used by rulers and governments to condition people's minds and keep them in a perpetual state of fear, making them very easy to manipulate and control. In fact, I've got research in my library showing that the Catholic Church had brainwashing mastered by the 8th century, and they've been perfecting it ever since. And if you don't get the concept of corporate religion, you might want to look into find out who the most wealthy corporation in the world is, and I'll save you some time. It's the Vatican. They actually own the Bank of America, among many other major corporations. The devil's favorite place to hide is in the church. The grand majority of what we call scriptures are actually myths and need to be looked at as teaching stories, or stories to inspire moral or ethical behavior for the betterment of all. But as Joseph Campbell warns, and others like Carl Jung, when taken literally, Any scripture or myth has the power to be very dangerous. Houston Smith's teaching on world religion is phenomenal, by the way. To use your mind effectively means that you need to engage ideas and see what kind of experience you're having. So, in other words, if you get invited to a Jewish temple or to a skinhead meeting, or you're thinking about joining the military, don't just go talk to a few guys in the military that are making some money in a peacetime situation. Go to a military hospital and talk to some of the guys that have shrapnel sticking in their body and limbs blown off, and get both sides of the coin for holistic thinking. But again, when you're working with ideas, you always have to ask, does this idea fit my values? Does it bring you a sense of wholeness or connection? Does it help you have empathy and compassion for others and for all living beings? Does it create authentic safety and security? Does the idea create short-term gain and long-term loss or damage? For example, microwave ovens are an idea that created the illusion of efficiency, but caused lots of problems for your health. And I won't go off on all that because that's not the intention of this podcast. Look at the cost of nature to implement a new idea, or the cost to nature, particularly when it comes to technology like 5G phone systems, farming chemicals, medical drugs, and many other such examples. Are you feeling more open and expansive, or fearful, closed, and contracted? Anyone paying attention is unlikely to ever feel open and connected while dropping bombs on others, regardless of how politicians justify such actions. So I'm only bringing these points up because they're polarized, they're charged, but they really give us an opportunity to look deeper than the surface of ideas, because ideas can be very helpful, but they can be very dangerous. I remember seeing many video clips on television during the Gulf War of soldiers writing, very derogatory, nasty comments on bombs that were about to be dropped on people and completely annihilate them and their families and everything else. And that is very immature, short-sighted behavior. And, Lao Tzu warns in the Tao Te Ching, when one side builds a bigger weapon, that's the first job that the next side's going to go after. And this building a bigger, more dangerous weapon goes on until we're at where we're at now. We got enough weapons, nuclear weapons, to destroy this entire planet about 179 times over. So let's just hope like hell the angels are watching, or some intelligent extraterrestrials with the power to neutralize such things. But we know that they certainly didn't use those powers when we dropped nuclear bombs on Japan. So our hearts know the truth of these things well before the ego does. So there's your next tip. Instead of listening to your head or your ego all the time, ask yourself, what does your heart have to say about it? And bring your consciousness down and be brave enough to feel the truth. Most people don't know the truth because they're too afraid not to get their own way, or they're caught in a belief system which is closed-ended, and all belief systems are closed-ended. You'll never know until you develop the spiritual courage to disengage from your ego and truly feel from your soul or your heart. And it's also wise to remember, like attracts like. Next in our tour of the mental stage of consciousness is images. The mind thinks in images, and we often say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I know I've found over and over again in my own life and in my career as a therapist that when we can't seem to find the words to describe how we're feeling inside, or to explain our wants, feelings, and needs to ourselves or others, that drawing, painting, or constructing models in clay or Play-Doh can work very well, because it has an opening effect, and it allows us to use kinesthetic expression and palpatory connection. So I use art therapy because many of my patients have been wounded, but they actually don't remember exactly what happened, but they know that they're in a state of tremendous turmoil. A good example of that is sexual wounds or sexual abuse by parents and other people, hurting children. So when I get somebody like that, they're often unable to express what they feel inside. But if I teach them how to use art to express themselves, well, it's pretty easy for me to find out what's going on, because the ego doesn't have any mechanism for defending itself against artistic expression. Using art also tends to access the child in us, and the child in the majority of people today has been repressed by social conditioning. So what we get is people that look like adults but act like broken children. And all you got to do is just look at any forum like Facebook to see how so-called adults communicate with each other, and it won't take you long to find the broken children in adult bodies playing with computer technologies. And Donald Trump's a very good example of the state of our nation here in the U.S., and I'd certainly start him off with some art therapy and introduce him to some plant medicines after lots of preparation, and reconnect him to nature. And I'm sure that it wouldn't take long before he'd rethink most of his policies and the way he deals with people. Next, we want to talk about mind, ideas, and wholeness as a way of understanding our spiritual growth. There's two basic paths of spiritual development in, historical use. One's called the positiva, the other is the negativa. And these both relate to the mental level of consciousness, which is why I'm sharing them here. So the positiva relates to the beauty of the mind, and that it allows the unintelligible to become intelligible. If we use our minds holistically, we start connecting the dots as we grow our minds. In other words, the more ideas and concepts we can work with, the more expansive our mind is, the greater our reach of possibility. Eventually, we see that this depends on that for its existence. In other words, the cows depend on the grass depends on the soil microorganisms. The soil microorganism depends on the cow for poop. Everything's eating something else. Everything in nature is connected. So if you keep asking good questions, you come sooner or later to the realization that all is part of everything else that is. This leads us to a more enlightened awareness of the whole, and some call the whole God or Tao or Source. So what I'm saying is, with the positiva, as we gain more authentic knowledge and experience through the effective use of our mind, and we start asking deeper and deeper questions, well, we find out that this connects to that, and this can't happen without that. Or we say, well, where did the planet Earth come from? And the next thing you know, we're being led to the fact that it is matter that was ejected from the sun. And then we say, well, where did that matter come from? And then scientists tell you, well, the matter in the sun was once in potentially millions of other stars, because black holes can gather energy, matter in for millions of miles around that could have come from any number of supernovas. So what you find out is that the entire universe makes the entire universe, including you, and that is the whole. And then you have to say, well, where does it come from? Well, it comes from whatever you call source. Some call it God, some call it Tao. Some just say, I don't know, and throw their arms in the air, and they just stop right there. But that's, kind of a cop-out. The negativa is the other path. When we go into meditation, with time, we get to experiences of no mind, and a paradox emerges. We find that behind things, all things, there is something the mind cannot grasp with thought, and that is pure awareness. Pure awareness is consciousness itself, and I'm spelling consciousness all in caps here to differentiate it from conscious of. You're conscious of me talking right now, but it's only because of consciousness within you that you are conscious of me talking. So pure awareness is consciousness itself, and is what must be present before we can be conscious of this or that. The amazing paradox waiting for us in this experience of pure awareness is that when you're there, you find out that all is and no thing is. And that is a mind-boggling thing. It's a mind-blower. So when we move into our usual waking consciousness or thinking mind after such experiences, we're likely to realize that the function of our mind is to learn to love, express love, and inspire others to do the same. Now, it's important to realize that no matter how smart or enlightened you think somebody is, it's ultimately how they treat others, nature, and life that is the only true exemplification of their level of enlightenment. In other words, enlightened people don't steal. Enlightened peoples don't typically get behind war efforts. You can't use war to create peace. That's just that's just an example of poor use of mind. People dying is not creating peace. So the negativa or positiva approach to self-realization, which is capital S-E-L-F realization, which means realization that you're connected to the whole, is always holistic, and it's also good for the future, be it individually or collectively. So now we're at the level of integral consciousness. So we've reached now the pinnacle of the level of consciousness that researchers can identify in the world today. And I will re-encapsulate integral consciousness for you. And remember, again, only 2% of the world population, based on research, is at this level. But research by people, I'm trying to remember his name, Clare Graves, for example, showed that when looking at his system, he has a value structure, and the top two tiers are yellow and turquoise, which would correlate very nicely with integral consciousness. He showed that people at the level of yellow and turquoise, as individuals, have 10 times the processing power of anybody at any of the levels below them. So it doesn't take a lot of people at integral level of consciousness to have a positive influence on the world. And when anyone makes it to integral consciousness, chances are good they spend a lot of their time trying to help other people get there, especially when the world is going through the kind of changes it is right now. So let's look at some of the key tips we can use, or that I can share, for becoming holistic and working towards getting more of us to the integral level as we move forward in time at this very interesting time of human development in the world. So now let's look at some of the elements of integral consciousness that we can use as tips for either being aware of what it looks like to be at that level, or tips that we can incorporate at any level to the degree that we're ready to step up to the integral level. And believe me, it is a step up. But you can't do this intellectually. This is only something that can be done through honest personal, professional, and spiritual growth and development. So using all the previous levels of conscious development that we've talked about is integral to being integral. Using the right mode of consciousness for the right situation at hand. For example, if you're meditating or doing healing work, an integral person would use the magical level of consciousness to drop into a trance state and merge with the other individual that they're working with to feel or perceive what's actually going on inside of them. Being present, and Eckhart Tolle's message is a very important message for people. And if you want to be integral, then I highly recommend Eckhart Tolle's teachings. Being present is also the basis of mindfulness practices, and all mindfulness practices really require three key factors: presence, being present, awareness, and intention. You can't be conscious of anything without awareness, and intention is what directs the flow of your energy. So to be present is really to be mindful and to be in a state of presence, awareness, and be clear about your intention, or you may be just creating unconsciously. And as Arnold Paton says so beautifully in his Universal Principles, which you can find at arnoldpaton.com, if you don't like what's happening in your life, look carefully at what you're creating unconsciously. Realizing that time is flexible and that how we condition our minds influences how we experience time. For example, if we're not managing ourselves well or managing our schedule well, or we're saying yes when we should be saying no, and we just are rushing from one obligation to the next, then time, really acts differently. We can feel very rushed, and time seems to speed up, and we are always out of time. But if we are in a state of presence and awareness, and we're using our intention to prioritize our activities in the order that is most important to complete them, then we notice that time slows down. So there's the flexibility of time. The integral person is very aware of a truth that Ken Wilber shares, and that is that there's a little bit of truth in everything. This is one of the reasons I've spent countless hours studying fundamentalist approach to religion, be it Islamic fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism, the fundamentalism of Judaism, or any other of the religions, because I'm very, very interested in understanding that mental structure. Becoming the fool and rising above the archetypes to see the big picture. This allows us to solve problems that can't be solved in any of the previous structure stages because of the limitations that are inherent in each of the structure stages. Now, the fool is a concept that I'm borrowing from tarot, and there's two kinds of fools in the world. There's the immature fool that is foolish, like people driving way beyond their skill level and getting themselves hurt and others hurt, or people getting drunk and driving cars, or doing drugs and driving cars and putting themselves and others at great risk. Or there's the wise fool, and in tarot, that's the person who's already lived through all the archetypes of the major arcana, which are really key archetypal functions that we all experience in our lives every day. And the mature fool has synthesized and integrated the archetypes so deeply into themselves that they are not caught in any one of the viewpoints expressed by the archetypes, but they're able to actually see beyond the limitations of the archetypes. And there are often people that seem very unusual or odd to people, or are hard to understand sometimes because their viewpoints are so comprehensive or all-encompassing that people with less developed minds can't really grasp them. And there are often people that are living in ways that people in the consensus norm or the average individual criticizes, but beneath that is the real, shall we say, jealousy that they're not as free as that person. So by the time you become integral, you've integrated a lot of levels of consciousness into yourself, all the ones I've described up to this point, and a lot of life experience. So actually, the fools are the wisest people that we usually want to consult when we're in trouble, but they're often living so differently than others that people don't really acknowledge the fact that they're worth listening to, which reminds me of a story, that really kind of brings this point up. There was a very, very rich billionaire guy who had a lot of serious health problems, and he had sent people all over the place looking for people to help him, and he'd seen all sorts of people, and nobody was able to help him. And then one day, one of his assistants came back from India and said that he had found a wise man way up in the Himalayan mountains that he thought could help him. And he was at his wit's end, so the rich man said, okay, well, let's go. We got nothing to lose. And they flew to India and then went on a very long trek and miles and miles and miles of hiking into the Himalayan mountains on, being led by a guide and, with food provisions and things like that. And they finally got there, and when they got there, the rich man was before a old man with scraggly matted hair and a long beard, and who was naked except for a loincloth sitting on the ground before him. And he was a bit mystified. And he said to this old man, wise man, he said, how in the world can you help me if you're broke and you have no money? And the the wise man looked at him and said, if you're so rich, why did you come all this way for my help? And there is the fool, the wise fool. His first reaction was, this guy was broke, poor, doesn't even have any clothes, so how in the hell could he help him? But the reality of it, he already saw all the rich doctors and famous therapists to no avail. So there, in that little teaching story, you can get the exemplification of the fool and see why so many people are running around to less developed people at lower levels of consciousness with narrow viewpoints. The integral also expresses itself in helping others see and understand what they can't see or understand. So people at the integral level make great teachers because they have a very, very good depth of knowledge and can see through things that others cannot see through. Understanding the unity of all human beings and helping others get past ethnocentric views, which means my group. Recognizing that any world religion can be practiced at the integral level. Realizing that the mystics taught the true religion, not corporate religion, and being an example of what integral religious and spiritual practice looks like is what an integral person does. You know, I've talked a lot about corporate religion, but within all the religions are mystics, such as Saint Bernard or Meister Eckhart, or Saint Hildegard of Bingen, or Rumi, the Sufi mystic, or many, many others I could name. So when people come to me with health problems and I track it right back to their religious ideas and beliefs that are usually not found on anything but programming, instead of telling them to practice other religions or introduce them to religions that are more holistic, such as Hinduism, for example, what I do is I work within their own religion, but I take them to the mystics so that they can really learn from the most evolved people in any religion. And oftentimes people are completely mind blown when they see what the mystics of their own religion had to say about everything to do with the religion. Devoting your time and life to supporting the world as a whole, be that the support of nature or human beings, is an integral practice. Recognizing and acknowledging where each person is at in their development and having empathy and compassion for them. By the time you're integral, you've pretty much lived through a lot of things, and you can see yourself in almost anybody. And typically, instead of judging them, you have empathy and compassion, and you're willing to support them to the degree that they will allow you to support them, or that you think is healthy for them. For example, you can't support drug addicts by telling them to get off of drugs or handing them money, but you can support them by finding out where their pain is and helping them understand their pain from a broader or deeper or more spiritual perspective. And that's the kind of things that integral people are gifted with the ability to do because of their development. And the integral person accepts responsibility for the fact that everyone's watching, and they know that the way they live is likely to be emulated by people, and the integral person is likely to be conscious of the question, what would love do now? So the integral person really has a very deep level of connection to all the previous structure stages, knows how to use them for the right situations, yet has the emergent property of higher consciousness that is not only the sum total of the prior structure stages, but is something greater that cannot be encapsulated as this or that. Now, to close out our podcast series here on reimagining yourself and how to understand what is truly holistic from the developmental stages of how we grew up to be the human beings that we are in consciousness, and how we can use the qualities of each of these levels of consciousness to live and think and function and love holistically, I'm going to share a concept that comes from a scholar of Ken Wilber's teachings and is really quite a genius by the name of Dustin DiPerna. And the concept I'm sharing with you came from his book, The Coming Waves. And the concept is wake up, grow up, clean up, and show up. And that's really where we're all at now, and that's one of the key reasons Dustin DiPerna and Ken Wilber both share this concept, and I couldn't agree more. So let's take a look at each of these stages. Waking up is facilitated by conscious use of each element of Jung's consciousness compass. So we need to become aware of what thinking is and how to do it effectively, what feelings are and the importance of values and how to use them effectively. Remember, your yes has no value until you learn to say no, and it's your values that determine when to say yes or no. Then we have sensation, being aware of and using the information provided by our senses intelligently and not getting overly drugged or overly dosed on sugar and concentrated foods, or you can end up with what Steiner called supersaturation, which means that the more stimulus you put into your body, the more you adapt to it and the more it takes. So, a little bit of coffee leads to a little bit more, leads to multiple cups, leads to people drinking whole pots of coffee, only to end up with burned out adrenal glands, hypothyroidism, and their fingernails falling off, which I've seen multiple times in my career. So as we wake up, we become both aware of ourselves as existing in the realms of consciousness beyond the gross physical world that we associate with our waking state. So what that means is that as we wake up, we become aware of ourselves not only as physical beings, but as emotional beings, as astral beings, as mental beings, as higher mental beings or aligned with our soul, and as expressions of the universe itself. Next is growing up. To do that, we have to nourish the child, so we're not projecting our childlike self as an eternal child. In other words, if we're acting in ways that leave others responsible for our choices or bailing us out financially, or we keep running to doctors and therapists to solve the problems that are really the results of us just not paying attention or being foolish, then we're acting out the child archetype or the eternal child archetype. We're not taking responsibility for our responsibilities or our choices or our actions. Growing up means honoring the importance of I before we and we before all, realizing that you are 50% of every relationship. So if you're not taking care of yourself, you're debilitating the relationship. And to the degree that you aren't taking care of yourself, not only can you not participate effectively in partnership relationships with any other, you cannot contribute to the all or the world. And ultimately, we're at a point in the evolution of human beings on this planet where we all need to start being concerned for each other and for the planet itself, or I don't think you need to be a genius to do the math on what's heading our way. Many, many great scientists have put out many warnings, and there's scores of books highlighting that very scientifically. To be an adult means to say what you mean and mean what you say. That is how I encapsulate the responsibility of being an adult. Say what you mean and mean what you say. And if you go back to my comments on the story gap, that becomes even more pronounced. Next is do your share. Make a contribution. Get beyond just watching football on television and eating bags of chips and smoking pot and drinking beer and going from paycheck to paycheck and just existing. We all need to participate in the world and in supporting each other. And no matter who we are, there are people less developed than us that are watching that could use a good example. You can always ask the question, would the world be a better place if everyone did what I'm about to do now? So, for example, I live in San Diego, California, and even in the dead of summer, where it's extremely high fire risk here, I see people throwing cigarette butts that are still burning out the window. You can see the sparks flying off of them, driving down roads right next to, thousands of acres of dry, combustible brush. So if you ask the question, would the world be a better place if everybody did what I'm doing now? Well, if everybody was throwing cigarette butts, the whole world would go up in flames, and plenty of California has, as a lot of you know. Or parking in handicapped spots when you're not handicapped, or littering, or cheating, lying, and stealing. These are all, things that if we just ask the question, what would the world be like if everybody did what I'm doing now? And it would be pretty obvious that it's time to grow up. Avoiding responsibilities to self, other, or the world is not growing up. We all are responsible for our own health, for loving ourselves, for taking care of ourselves to the degree that we're not disabled. And we're responsible for our commitment to partnerships and relationships, and we're all responsible for the world, which is why I tell all my students, you don't change things by voting because the whole political system is crooked. You change things by being conscious of where you spend your money. Because if you don't buy stuff, they eventually can't afford to keep making it. And if it's toxic, like commercial food, then you don't want to buy it because you're just destroying the entire planet. Next is cleanup. By being consciously connected to our body, we're getting direction as to what we are creating and where we are imbalanced. So your body is always mirroring your mind, and your mind mirrors your body. We must be constantly aware of what I call our echo. Echo in the Chek Holistic Lifestyle Coaching System stands for energy, chemistry, hydration, and the organisms that we consume. However we get our energy and create our internal biochemistry through food, water, and whatever enters our body, whatever we hydrate ourselves with and where we're getting it and how much we're taking and what organisms we're eating and where they came from and how they were farmed has a direct impact on our environment. And whatever we do to the environment, we do to ourselves because we live in the environment, we drink the environment, we eat the environment, we breathe the environment, we walk in it, we sleep in it, we play in it. So when we realize that what we do is echoed back to us to the degree that we live in ways that are sustainable and ethical to all other living beings, then the echo is pleasant. But to the degree that we do what we've done now with drilling and fracking and polluting and warring and destroying, well, when that echo comes back, it just echoes that right back to you. My ebook, The Last 4 Doctors You'll Ever Need, and my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy Now, and my online course, Chek Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, are all very supportive tools for cleaning yourself up. Then we come to show up, and that's very important. The world, or nature, is now in a very dangerous place with the unconscious use and selfish, financially motivated use of advanced technologies. The majority of people in the world are deeply caught in what I call mass distraction, and television is one of the most dangerous forms of distracting and manipulating people. Remember, the word television literally means tell a vision, program people. So be very conscious about what you're watching. If you study my PPS Success Mastery Lesson 2, I teach you the science of brainwashing and how it's being used against you all the time. If you read the book Hooked by Nir Eyal, he shows you the exact technology and mechanisms they use to addict you to all sorts of computers, games, phones, etc. But he also shows you how you can use it to your advantage. And you can listen to my podcast with him, Nir Eyal. And that was a fairly recent one. And I think you'll learn a lot. For showing up, we make choices that reflect our awakened consciousness. Our money supports other conscious corporations, and we effectively starve out dangerous corporations because they're forced to comply with our needs or they perish. It's very important to think holistically and investigate ideas and concepts before we get behind them or invest in them. So remember, there's two sides to every rock or every idea. Examples where this is essential are issues of vaccination, modern medical approaches to treating chronic illness, spending on military budgets, communications technologies, banking strategies, trade agreements, gender bias, racial bias, war efforts, and there are many more areas that are very, very hot, very, very dangerous, charged, and alive that require integral thinkers to get involved now. As you center yourself, cultivate chi through holistic practices, and show up, people naturally sense your authenticity. We can be silent lovers and silent teachers, as well as extending ourselves to others in service, to the we and the all, so that we can be the change. Each day in your own healing, you develop more empathy and compassion for yourself and others, and this is how love grows. The more you heal in yourself authentically, the more you can see that kind of pain or wound in others and support them with the wisdom that you've gained. Integral people, I can assure you, have worked through a lot of pain to get to that level, or they wouldn't be there. As I teach all Chek professionals, our healing is essential on-the-job training, making us real coaches with authentic empathy and compassion for our clients. And I task all Chek professionals to apply all their teachings to themselves first, or they don't really understand what they're asking other people to do. Using an adult attachment interview is a very helpful tool for identifying events that formed our personality and our disposition. And you can find an excellent adult attachment form in Dr. Dan Siegel's book, Brainstorm, which is designed to help understand teenagers, but it can be used with anybody to gain a lot of information about yourself that can be helpful. And through using an adult attachment interview, we can also see the events that we're shadow generating for ourselves and others. And with awareness, we can begin healing ourselves or supporting others in their healing. Through our process, we can more easily recognize childhood challenges as the source of pain and unconsciousness in ourselves. And through our own healing, we can influence and guide others effectively and authentically. Well, that brings us to the end. I have really enjoyed sharing this with you. I'm encapsulating many, many years of study into just a short space here. And I did my best to try to keep it practical and give you lots of ideas you can work with. So I really hope you've enjoyed ancient wisdom for reimagining your health and performance. I'd love to have you join the Chek Academy or any of our advanced training programs so that you can gain the skill to be truly holistic in your life and work with clients and patients if you are in the exercise or healthcare profession in holistic ways. And all Chek professionals, at least all the ones I've met, there's over 10,000 of them, I met a lot of them, but we're all committed to being the change. If you enjoyed this important podcast series, please share it with everyone that you think will benefit from understanding consciousness and holistic living more fully. I thank you very much for joining me. I send my love and blessings to all of you on your individual and collective journeys, and I look forward to sharing much more with you through my Living 4D with Paul Chek podcast, and I have many amazing guests scheduled for you, so stay tuned. Lots of love.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek. You can follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living 4D Podcast or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/Living 4D with Paul Chek. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and at the Chek Institute's streaming channel, chekiva.com. It's not long until the grand unveiling of the Chek Institute's new online shopping experience, coming November 29th on Black Friday. In celebration, we're offering 20% off all original Chek products from Friday, November 29th through Monday, December 1st. Plus, throughout the day on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, there will be special additional discounts. Stay tuned to the Chek Institute social media and sign up for email announcements at chekinstitute.com.